There's a very particular kind of magic that existed only in the sword and sorcery flicks of the 1980s. Think handmade props, low-budget locations, bodybuilders doubling up as actors, and a lot of cheese. I don't expect today's youth to understand it because they've been pumped with CGI and hyper-realistic effects for years now. So anything a little unpolished gets dismissed as sloppy. And that's a real shame, because some of these films are worth a second look. I'm not just talking about Conan, of course. That obviously sits at the top of this genre. But there are many other films lurking in its shadow that are just as bold, imaginative, and also really weird. I don't mean that in an ironic way, like they are those so bad that they end up being good kind of movies. Well, most of them are, because they were trying to become the next Conan, you know? In this video, let's go back to a simpler, CGI-less time when fantasy films were all about ambition, creativity, and audacity. The Sword of the Barbarians, 1982. Directed by Nicola Massimo Tarantini, this film makes a reference to King Ator, the lead of another sword and sorcery series starring Miles O'Keefe, but the central action revolves around Sangral, who's said to be his son. There's an evil warlord, obviously, who pillages and destroys the plains where Sangral lives. This guy, Nantuk, is actually doing everything on the orders of Rani, the goddess he worships, but mind you, she is no benevolent deity. As the goddess of fire, she has her own agenda and is simply using Nantuk as a chess piece. Anyway, Sangral and his people move away from their plains and are offered shelter at a village. Nantuk then becomes the king, but his overlord, or lady, tells him that unless he kills Sangral for good, he's going to lose his life, soul, and his kingdom. There's always a catch while making these deals with such deities. Also, she has a personal vendetta against the guy because he killed her priests, who are going around trying to gather virgins to be sacrificed to her. To carry out Rani's command, Nantuk again attacks the village, but this time the losses are far more severe. Sangral watched his wife Lena get killed, and the whole village ended up in flames. He gets narrowly rescued by the village chief's daughter, Ati, who has been trying to catch his attention ever since he arrived. I must admit, this sequence felt really weird because Sangral was really useless, having been tied to an X-cross so that he gets the best seat in the house to witness the massacre. Anyway, he's rescued and they come across a nomad named Liwo Tuan. Heartbroken at the loss of his wife, Sangral says that he wishes to find a way to bring her back to life, much to Adi's dismay, so they find this wizard named Rudak, who apparently can do stuff like that. However, Sangral gets a bitter dose of reality when Rudak says that the dead can never be brought back to life, and the only way he can be with Elena is in the afterlife. But before he can do that, he must fulfill his destiny on Earth. As you can guess, it involves killing this evil goddess. Does he manage to finish his quest and meet with his wife once he's dead? Or, like most fantasy heroes, does he just end up with a woman willing to throw herself at him? I'll leave that for you to find out. Now, I know the plot sounds cheesy AF, but this is sword and sorcery we're talking about, okay? If Conan didn't end up being a hit, it would have been called just as cheesy. My favorite parts about this film were the costumes and the set design, because they certainly elevated the scenes to a higher level and made them more impactful. Xiomara Rodriguez is exceptional as Rani, the main villain, and I just wish we could have seen more of her fiery, sultry, and bloodthirsty self. The Throne of Fire, 1983. If your checklist for a Friday night includes A Spawn of Satan, A Flaming Throne, and Sabrina Siani, then Franco Prosperi's final film has absolutely got you covered. The plot of this movie is as unhinged as any fantasy cinema of that time, but I think it does a better job with the acting, stunts, and set locations than most of its contemporaries. So there's a Throne of Fire, which is literally the throne the king sits on. And yes, the fire is not metaphorical. If any unworthy person sits on it, their sorry ass will get burnt to a crisp. Pun not intended. But since this is sword and sorcery after all, there is a pretty nifty workaround to become worthy. And that's exactly what Morak, the antagonist, is trying to do. He is the son of Satan and takes that role very seriously because his mission in life is to, quote, kill women and children and become a supreme ruler ruler. With an approaching solar eclipse, if he marries into the royal family, it will allow him to sit on the burning throne safely. And for that purpose, he kidnaps Princess Valkyrie, played by the gorgeous Sabrina Siana. I appreciate how Morak is not the bumbling, cartoonish, silly villain this kind of movie usually settles for. He is cold, purposeful, and menacing in the right way. The princess, though, is the one who walks away with the film. She fights back a lot and does it impressively using her feet, fists, and a blade. In a genre that routinely treats women as furniture, this detail alone earns the movie serious points in my book. But wait, we have the bad guy and the damsel in distress, so where is our barbarian hero? Siegfried, played by Pietro Torrisi, plays the protagonist who must prevent Morak from becoming king, but the other two leads overshadowed his performance. This is one of the better post-Conan cash grabs and is also more in tune with the Italian supernatural genre. If you've seen it, what did you like about it? Let me know in the comments. Thor the Conqueror, 1983. This one's not among my favorites, but I have seen a surprising number of people praise it for being true to the barbarian ideal, hence I am including it in this list. Fair warning, if you're about to watch it, there are parts where it gets really disturbing, even for this genre. And no, this is not Chris Hemsworth's all-around good guy Thor, quite the opposite in fact. Directed by Totino Ricci, this movie was released in 1983, landing right in the middle of the post-Conan gold rush that had Italian studios churning these out practically on a seasonal basis. This was Ricci's go at sword and sorcery, and I can tell you that he threw himself into it with genuine enthusiasm, even if the budget was not quite throwing itself back. The titular character is taken in and raised by the embodiment of the god Tisha, who's a horrible mentor and father figure. He raises Thor into becoming a good fighter and all, but also teaches him to be the most misogynistic character you have ever seen. Violence is not something we don't see in the fantasy genre, but the way Thor pretty much abducts, rapes, and kills women left and right for no good reason, except that his mentor, who can sometimes turn into an owl by the way, told him so, is not a good look. To be honest, I had to skip through most of those parts. He's not a man who invites your sympathy, so it's hard to think of him as a hero. And the actual plot, the fact that he has to avenge the death of his parents, just takes a back seat. This is a flawed film, and not the best entry in this list. But there is a weird, wild energy to it that makes it hard to dislike entirely, and that could be attributed in part to how the film is overall extremely gruff and messy. It is a barbarian movie through and through. There is no polish or refinement anywhere, even in the parts where there should be. The Italian fantasy films of this era can trace a lineage back to the peplum adventures of the 1960s, and Thor the Conqueror reminded me of that line of cinema. Conan, King of the Barbarians, 1982. This movie is, by most reasonable measures, Conan the Barbarian, but much dumber. Despite that being a very well-known fact, there is a particular kind of audience that considers this to be a selling point rather than a criticism. I'm not trying to call anyone out, but you know who you are. The film shows a peaceful village getting raided and destroyed by barbarians called the Ungats, led by their chief, Nuriak. 2 infant boys survive and are rescued by a tribe of Amazons, who raise them under a prophecy that one of them one day will bring the Ungats to their knees. The prophecy, rather inconsiderately, only mentions one boy, which obviously does wonders for sibling rivalry. Conan is played by Pietro Torrisi, and he is the brother who ends up surviving despite really just being all muscles and no brain. Sabrina Siana appears as Lenny, his love interest, and her presence really does most of the heavy lifting here. After all, she was practically cast in almost every Italian fantasy film at that time, and her characteristic role does get the heart beating faster, if you know what I mean. There's also a rather weird pseudo-incest plotline where the woman who has raised Conan and his brother ends up having really problematic feelings for him, and even thinks of Lenny as her rival. The nudity is plentiful and clearly used as a distraction from the fact that the movie's pacing is questionable. A fan on IMDb describes it as borderline mental. It has an almost animalistic rawness to it, and I agree that is the essence of the genre. Whether you like it or not depends on how patient you can be and what your threshold is for being entertained. It is a hit with the boys for sure because, well, the costume department clearly just ran out of money after making enough clothes for only the male characters. Iron Warrior, 1987. Now, this is one movie that grabs you by the collar at the very beginning and refuses to let go, even if you really want to leave. Is that a good or bad thing? You can make that call after watching it yourself. What stands out to me in Iron Warrior is the overall surrealist vibe, which gives it a personality of its own in terms of the visuals and locations, and that puts it in a different category than its contemporaries. Miles O'Keefe returns as Ator, and we get a little more backstory on his character. Apparently, he had a twin brother named Trogar, and they were separated by a sorceress named Phaedra as infants. She raised this boy as a weapon to further her own interests, and eventually, Ator ends up facing him on the battlefield without either of them knowing who their opponent really is. What Iron Warrior does not hold back on is action, which is again something I really enjoyed. Sword and Sorcery has the word sword in it, for God's sake, so sometimes the overt reliance on nudity gets really boring. But this film really has it all. The action sequences are done so well that you might end up comparing them to Conan. Alfonso Brescia, the director, was clearly heavily inspired by both the Star Wars and Indiana Jones films. Some fans have said that he brought a George Lucas sensibility to the production design. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but the sets certainly have an aggressive, comic-style iconography that feels very different from anything else in the Ator series, and even in other fantasy movies of the time. Someone even called this European wuxia, and it's the first time I've ever heard that term, but I agree that it's exactly what this movie is. The imagination behind the scenes, despite the low budget, is refreshing to look at, and I wonder why other filmmakers of the time didn't do anything similar. Because the 80s sword and sorcery films would have been very different if more movies were like this one. Lots of action, lots of drama, great pace, and less of the cheese. I absolutely recommend this one to all of you. Storm Quest, 1987-1988. All this time we were talking about men doing the pillaging and destroying, while women were mostly silent or unwilling spectators. And that's no fun. I'm not trying to pull an Ocean's 8 here, but seeing the same people play the same roles is just not entertaining after a point. Stormquest changes that with a matriarchal world where men are just as useful for breeding. They are the subservient ones, and all power effectively remains with women. Please don't come at me in the comments saying this is unnatural and illogical. Please, guys, we're talking about films where zombies and magic and sons of the devil are real. Anyway, in that world, a few women come forward and raise the demand for gender equality, arguing against the poor treatment of the males. Naturally, this triggers immediate dislike among everyone else, especially some really angry grandmas, because they just don't see the point of liberating the men or allowing them any privileges beyond what they already have. To them, the whole purpose of a man is just to assist in procreation. But the Crusaders don't agree, which leads to an all-out revolt. Kai Baker plays the lead role of Era here, as she is sentenced to death for trying to rescue her sister, Asha, played by Christina Whitaker, from the crime of having loved and protected a man. Variety really reviewed the film very well, calling it an enjoyable fantasy feature lensed in Argentina that Philip Wiley might have enjoyed, the women battling the men. Well, it's not the most serious of these films. There are quite a few moments of dark humor and ill-timed laughs, and a very surprising plot twist when the Storm Queen's real identity is revealed. Also, in case you're wondering why I said that the release year for this is 1987-1988, that's because the film had wrapped production and was supposed to be released in '87 itself. However, instead of being released commercially in theaters, it was directly released to the video market in 1988. Wizards of the Lost Kingdom, 1985. This is what you should reach out for if you want an unfiltered, pure B film. Bo Svensson plays one of the lead roles, and I'm pretty sure he was not too enthusiastic about making this movie. Wizards of the Lost Kingdom is a very self-explanatory title because the film follows a wizard who tries to reclaim a lost kingdom, and that's the whole plot. In the peaceful kingdom of Axholm, Simon is the son of the court wizard and our protagonist. The king is murdered during an uprising led by an evil sorcerer named Shurka, and his daughter, Princess Aura, is kidnapped. In a desperate attempt to save his son, the wizard sends Simon and his friend Gulfax to safety via teleportation and gives them a magic ring, using which they can take back the kingdom. But Simon loses that, which then leads on to the other events of the film. He teams up with a soldier named Kor to rescue the princess and kill Shurka, who has now seized power and has hypnotized Aura into agreeing to marry him. We have the full range of fantasy creatures in this film, right from insectoid humans, hobgoblins, lizard men, to cyclopses, who have very strange marriage traditions. One of these creatures looked completely like it was made of dryer lint. I genuinely have no other way to describe it, but I'll leave it for you to find out which one it was. Kor then gets captured by the Cyclopses and is given the choice to marry one of them against his will or get eaten. Very praying mantis style, don't you think? Don't worry, he doesn't become Cyclops' dinner. All of this could have been avoided if Simon had not lost the ring, and he does find it eventually. Some fans have pointed out that the film could have been better if the lead actors had just put in a little more effort, because while it is cheesy as hell, it sure is entertaining. Another thing I found odd is how a lot of the scenes in this movie seemed too similar to some of the other sword and sorcery flicks I've watched. So I investigated and found that the filmmakers indeed added scenes from other movies. Ed Naha had written the script for this, and he has stated, "I don't think this movie was so much shot as it was beaten to death. When they whittled it down to what was useful from the footage, it only ran 58 minutes. Yeah, I found scenes from at least 2 other films, but if you're able to identify more, let me know in the comments." Black Angel, 1980. We're moving away from Italy for a while and journeying to medieval England now. The first thing you have to know about this is that Black Angel was the directorial debut of none other than Roger Christian. Does the name ring a bell? Well, he was the art director of Star Wars from 1977, which got him an Oscar award, and he got another nomination for his work on Alien in 1979. And that should tell you that this is definitely the best entry in this list, and genuinely deserves more appreciation. This was actually shown before the theatrical release of The Empire Strikes Back across certain regions too, and fans came out praising both films. The plot is also really simple. It follows a knight who returns from the Crusades and sees that his family has been killed and his village destroyed. The very few survivors are suffering from some strange plague, so he vows to help them, and in his journey comes across a mysterious woman who claims she's being held by the Black Angel. She begs him to go away and turn a blind eye, but he presses on until he realizes he's bitten off more than he can handle. This is medieval fantasy at its best, with a haunting gothic tone, and the nicest thing about it is the runtime. You won't realize just when the 25 or so minutes have ended, and it will make you wish there was more. And despite technically belonging to the sword and sorcery subgenre, this is truly more of a self-development story that makes you think and reflect, instead of just flooding your veins with adrenaline. I'll admit that the costumes needed work, because the protagonist's helmet looks like it's straight out of a cartoon, and some of the stunts are extremely amateurish. But the cinematography will make you forgive those, trust me. If you're a fan of downcast, toned scenes, like think Winterfell from Game of Thrones, then this will be a hidden gem for you. Conquest, 1983. This is among the most infamous sword and sorcery movies directed by Lucio Fulci, who is most popularly credited with creating the zombie boom in Italian cinema with Zombie 2. You'll also see the lovely Sabrina Ciani once again here in the antagonist's role, and that's always a visual delight. A review called it Conan the Barbarian on 10% of the budget and with cocaine-snorting werewolves. Oh my. As weird as that sounds, it is exactly the best way to describe this movie. The protagonist is a young man named Ilias, who is given a bow that will guide him into becoming a man, and he sets out on a journey to a land that has the full deluxe collection of all fantasy creatures. Their leader is the mysterious sorceress named Okran, who sees a vision of a strange man with a magical bow attacking her. She sends some of her minions after him, but it doesn't work out. Ilias also meets with Mace, a seasoned warrior who wants to purge the land of all evil, and after a while, you'll realize that Mace should really be called the protagonist of the film because he seems to do most of the fighting. Ilias, in his quest to become a man, ends up nearly eloping with a pretty girl, an act which gets the poor woman killed. Okran becomes even more obsessed with the strange man and strikes a deal with Zora, a spirit, saying that if it can finish Ilias for good, she will offer herself to it. Ilias, on the other hand, is no longer interested in traveling to find his purpose and wants to hand over the bow to Mace and return home. Obviously, the hero can't just decide to quit in the middle of the game, so Mace refuses. The highlight of the movie comes when we see a group of sentient dolphins help our barbarian duo greatly in their mission to take down Okran. And no, I am not kidding. Anyway, that's the whole movie. A lot of weird things happen that make you scratch your head, but also you'll find yourself rooting for Mace. The cinematography is quite good considering the budget, and if you're a fan of gore, you'll certainly enjoy the oozing pustules and plentiful blood. Hundra, 1983. Finishing off strong, we have the poster girl of what empowerment meant in the 80s. Hundra is an Amazonian warrior who has zero interest in being with a man or even conversing with one. She spends her days training, riding horses, and not thinking about men. But the peace doesn't last, unfortunately. Her tribe gets attacked by a group of gruff barbarians, with her being the only survivor. Suddenly, the woman who never wanted to even look at a man's face has to confront the fact that she's responsible for the survival of her tribe. And that involves her doing the tango she doesn't want to do. She somehow manages to go for an old woman for advice and is basically told to have kids. And that's her life's purpose, and the reason why she survived. Oh, so much for empowerment. She bitterly makes peace with it and sets out to find a compatible mate, and encounters a bunch of what we today call, incels, and rejects them quickly. After a lot of searching, she finds the right man, but is unable to seduce him. So she learns the art and finally gets pregnant. Her baby girl gets kidnapped after birth, and poor Hundra now has to get the child back from an evil priest. This process involves a really disturbing humiliation ritual, which was probably the least favorite part of the movie for me. Oh, and this creepy priest gets an extremely controversial death, but I won't spoil it for you here because you have to watch it for yourself to get the laughs out. Laureen Landon plays the lead role well enough, especially doing a good job of emphasizing her sexuality that's very subtly veiled behind the idea of empowerment. Hundra is sensual, funny, sometimes obnoxious, but the action scenes aren't half bad. Definitely not kid-friendly, but good enough for a night in with a couple of cold beers. Many of these films have amassed a cult following over the years because they pretty much define that barbarian genre to a T. You have swords, you have sorcery, you have really beautiful and scantily clad people in lead roles, and creatures that will not spook you in the slightest. But hey, CGI can never recreate the raw thrill and laughs that these movies will give you. If I had to pick just one movie out of all of these, I'd go with Black Angel, because it's at least not amateurish like the others. But the others are fun too in their own ways. So everybody, let me know how many of these are already on your watch list, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like to encourage the team and help us bring you more obscure movie content.